First tonight, and I should call you brothers and sisters. I've been asked to come and talk to you a little bit about the speech that I gave some 150 years ago this past week. I recognize that some of you were in attendance at a similar interfaith meeting down in Gilbert on Tuesday night, and so I hope I don't bore you with the same details. I started that night telling you that I had to apologize for the color of my beard. As you probably may or may not be aware, this February I'll be 205 years old. But I thought that I would try to make myself look a little younger by making it a little blacker than normal, but it still didn't work. I need to set the stage of that day 150 years ago, because there's been some misconceptions that have crept into our history over the past 150 years. It was a lovely morning. I arrived on the train the night before, spent the night in the home of David Wills, where I completed my address. Many people say that I actually wrote it on the back of an envelope during the previous 2 hours of the program, but I had most of it completed before I arrived. And I spent that evening with my Secretary of State and completing it. But the next morning, I got the privilege of getting on a horse and riding around Gettysburg. I don't know if any of you have been to Gettysburg. It lies almost exactly 2,200 miles east of here. It's a little backwater place in southern Pennsylvania, not far from Washington, D.C. 4.5 months before the time that I addressed that group in November, there had been a horrendous battle. 8,000 men had lost their lives. When you count the number of injured and missing and those who would later die from their wounds, there was over 51,000 casualties in that 3-day battle. We were there just shortly after they had created the cemetery. The mounds were still fresh. It was a very touching an emotional setting that morning as I rode around. I'd actually lost a good friend in that battle, General John Reynolds. And when I returned, about a few minutes, I did jot down some changes to my address because of what I felt and saw and heard as I rode around that battlefield. I normally did not like to put extemporaneous things into my speeches, but that day I felt different. And I think it's fitting to note in this setting that I added extemporaneously the word "under God." And in a few minutes, I'll recite my speech again. And I want you to listen to those words. They were not in what I had originally written. Actually, there are 5 official versions of my speech. We didn't have fancy recording machines back then. There were a few stenographers who were taking it down in shorthand, things that I said. And I was able to keep some drafts. But actually, the official version, I didn't put to pen and paper until about 5 months after the fact. So you'll just have to rely on my memory that I said what I said. It was a wonderful program. There was a wonderful prayer that literally brought me to tears. by Reverend T.H. Stockton. And then we were favored by many musical numbers, such as we had here tonight. There was 2 bands present, and it was a joyous and wonderful occasion. The main program was not me, but it was a man by the name of Edward Everett, who was a modern-day equivalent of a movie star. He was a great orator, and he spent 2 hours. It wasn't long and boring, it was very entertaining. It was inspirational, it was wonderful. He talked about the sacrifices of the men, and of the town folks and the women who came to their aid in the rescue. And it was a wonderful, inspiring, dedicatory prayer. I call it a prayer, a dedicatory service in which we were dedicating this cemetery and monument. With that, I would like to recite that speech that I gave. It was short. Some of my political detractors called it silly. It's taken them 150 years. This past week, they finally apologized in a formal editorial in their paper. But I feel that these words were given to me and inspired from my Heavenly Father. I often used the Bible as my text, at least for my ideas, and that's how I opened this speech. It was from a way in Psalms, the 90th Psalms, verse 10, where the psalmist talks about a way of determining years and ages. So here it is. And I want to read it because I don't want there to be a 6th version out there. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in the larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add any try. The world will little note here, nor long remember what we say, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Thank you.